Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. I'm glad you're here on this Friday edition of Ask the Theologian. I'm Randy White. We're taking your biblical, theological, and worldview questions. Call a friend. Say, hey, there's this great bald-headed guy taking biblical, theological, worldview questions. Check it out on worshify.com. We will question the assumptions. You notice I don't have an African violet today. I've got a geranium. And I tell you why I got a geranium, because last fall, I was moving around some geraniums that were outside, trying to put them in, save them a little bit. This piece broke off. I stuck it in a pot, and now look at it. It's blooming. Now, if that doesn't make life worth living, then I don't know what does, right? Who needs a reason to live? You just need a geranium. That's what you need. Get you a geranium or an African violet. It'll make your life pretty and pink. Now, good to see each one of you, and ready to get into a good day of programming here today. And I should show you here. I'll maybe will it take me a second? I shouldn't waste your time on things like this, but there's something I want to show you. And where are we? Here we go. Okay. So, I'll go ahead and get it downloaded, and then I can show you. Sorry, I didn't think that was going to take forever. There we go. This Sunday, 9:45 a.m., we start Philippians, rightly divided, verse by verse. And maybe you can join us live or in the archives, and we will have a great time gathered for that. And then we have on Sunday at 10:45, we have the Because You Asked, and no, that's the Because You Asked series, of course. But what did you ask? You asked confession. I got a graphic for that too, but it's hidden in there somewhere. So 9:45, first session of Philippians, rightly divided. I hope you'll join us for that. 10:45, we've got should you confess your sins publicly? The public confession of sins. Is that something that is required of us biblically? We'll look into those two issues this Sunday. Of course, you don't have to watch it live. You can catch that archived as well. Let's begin our questions then today, as we go down to Randy, who's got a question. What do you think that time as mankind? Do you think that time as mankind knows it began at creation or once Adam sinned? Now, it's really a fabulous question, because I believe it was yesterday I mentioned that Adam lived 936 years. It was sometime this week. Adam lived 936 years. Now, the question is that 936 years after the garden, or is that 936 years from the sixth day of creation? Little bit difficult to determine, and I suppose in one sense it's probably anybody's guess. anybody's guess. But with that said, we do know that you have the counting of time during the garden period. First day, second day. Actually, it says day one, and then it says second day, third day, fourth day, fifth day, sixth day, seventh day, God rested. That certainly is the counting of time. We do not know how much time then Adam was in the garden and, naming the animals, recognizing that they all had a help suitable, but I don't have a help suitable, and the creation of Eve and how long Eve was there and all those kind of things that take place. We really don't have any kind of measurement of that period of time. So that 936 years that Adam had, when do we start counting? Does time as we know it begin at creation, or does it begin somewhere else? Now, I think probably because we can count time during the pre-fall period with those days, I suppose if you can count a day, you can count a year, and all that then can come together, and the 936 years would be from the day that he was created unto the day that he died. Now, I am not sure. Perhaps Genesis 5 would tell us. Yes, it does. In Genesis chapter 5, verse 3, it says, Adam lived 130 years and begat a son in his own image, and called after his image, and called his name Seth. Now, this doesn't tell us about Cain and Abel, but 130 years. So from that, if we count time from the day of his creation, then 130 years, he's having Seth, which means Cain and Abel have already grown up, and Cain has already killed Abel, and Cain has already gone off into the land of Nod, and then Seth is born. Which, to do that, you're probably talking, maybe you could have 50, 60, 70, 80 years in the garden prior to the fall and the birth of Cain, to put all that. I'm doing that math very quickly in my head, but do I think time as mankind knows it began at creation, or once Adam sinned? I'm going to go with at creation. And the reason with that is because we measure time based upon the created order. Now, something interesting that I've been studying, and I'm going to do some more work on this. I'm not ready to come out and say I like the position or anything like that, but it's an intriguing position. And that is that time, as Randy and Randy knows it, as you and I know it, is relative. Einstein had this theory of relativity, and it had to do with time. Now, that means that, a day for us is a day. A day is 24 hours. But we know, as a matter of fact, that, and this boggles the mind, but we know that a plane traveling quickly, obviously planes do, that time actually moves slower. So if you put a clock, tick-tock, 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 on the plane, it is going to tick-tock slower than the clock on the ground. It's relativity. Has this stretching thing. I hope I got that right. It may be the opposite, the opposite, that it moves faster. But no, I think it's slower. But nonetheless, speed does affect it. Now, the universe, especially in the beginning, was expanding. This may mean that there is a concept of the first day, the second day, the third day of creation, on through the sixth day, were days. 24-hour days like our days. But as that stretched out now over time, this is perhaps one of the reasons why scientists look, and scientists insist that the world is billions and billions of years old. And it could have to do with our perspective of that stretching of time that takes place. Now, that really wouldn't affect those that were right there in it. And one of the examples that I've seen given is, let's suppose that Adam sits down and takes a little Post-it note and says, first, second, and sends it off into space. And 6,000 years later, you and I, here it comes floating down, and we receive it. And he said, first, second. And he said, I'm going to send one of these every second. Well, we'd be looking in the sky, and we would expect, now that the first one has come, every second it's going to come. But actually, it wouldn't happen that way. There would be, depending on the velocity of the stretch of the universe, there would be maybe a year or 100 years or 1,000 years between the first one and the second one and the third one. Now, in Adam's perspective, he wrote them 1 second at a time. He sent them out 1 second at a time. Boom, boom, boom. So Time was for him. But by the time it got to us, the stretching of the universe caused that to slow down. It's the theory of relativity. Now, that again could be why scientists are looking back and saying, we see this to be very old. We see that that was billions and billions of years ago. And it has to do with that theory of relativity. Some interesting kind of stuff there. Again, I'm not ready to completely go for it. It's intellectual kind of stuff. It's scientific kind of stuff that takes a little bit to get into. But I'm going to go with the counting of time on day one, and that was time as we know it. Even though scientifically, looking back on it, the science may say, no, that was, that first day was billions and billions of years. No, it wasn't billions and billions of years. It's just that we look back and it's been stretched, because this is what happens when the universe expands. Therefore, those billions of years that scientists say took place in that first day, they actually took place in one day. But the perspective now is very, very different. We know that in spatial things, perspective makes quite the difference. I mean, you can look, off at something in the distance, and it maybe looks very small, and something closer looks tall, and it's just a perspective kind of thing. When actually, one may be much shorter than the other, depending on the perspective that you're coming from. Time does the same thing. This is what Einstein discovered: is that time is relative, just like physical objects are relative, depending on your perspective. Thanks, Randy, for the good question. I appreciate that, and thank you. I'm supposed to just click the complete button, right, Nathan? Let's go to Robert in Holly Springs, Mississippi. Adam. When Adam said, let's see if we can find this in chapter 2. Verse, what is it here? Where Adam comes forth, and here he goes. So beginning in verse, let's say verse 23, Genesis 2:23. Adam said, "This is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man." The question is, why didn't he say, "This is my blood"? We would say things like, he's a blood relative. She's a blood relative. He didn't say anything about that. He's bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. Now, as I've said before, I think the why questions are the hardest questions to answer. What was his motivation? What was he thinking? Is it that he had no understanding of blood? I doubt it. I think Adam was very, very intelligent. Maybe, this is a little speculation, but maybe Adam was born with full knowledge. He was created, I shouldn't say born, he was created as a grown man with full knowledge. There's every degree of evidence that, he's not having to learn things by experience. You and I have to learn things by experience. He's not having to learn things by experience, so he comes with his memory banks fully loaded. And so to argue he didn't know anything about blood, he was just an old caveman. What would he know about blood? All he can see is flesh and bones. And so he said, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. When the blood, of course, obviously is the source of life, you might call it, physically. I would have a hard time defending that argument that he didn't know anything about blood. First of all, it would totally be an argument from silence that he didn't know anything about blood. Even if he had to learn some from history, he certainly knew male and female. He certainly knew all the creatures, all the things. He knew how the world works, all this kind of stuff. So why didn't he say, "This is my blood"? I suppose it would be it would be that literally God took out of his out of his side. And this is in verse 21, Genesis 2:21. The Lord caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam. He slept, took one of his ribs, closed up the flesh instead thereof. Now, ribs, let's just check that particular word here in Strong's. Okay, ribs and side, corners, it's all the same as you see how it's used right there. In fact, let's go ahead and take, again, just the Strong's word, and it is side 19 times, a chamber 11 times, boards twice, corners twice, ribs twice in the King James. So he took from the side. Well, in human anatomy, we would call that ribs. So took one of his ribs, closed up the flesh thereof. So this, it doesn't even appear that there was any blood taken, that he made this from his side. Let's check in the Hebrew interlinear here and see in the center column, took one, echad. That is the that's, I'm making sure I remember my Hebrew right. Hopefully I have here. That is the word for a singular one and not two. So therefore, those who complain and say, well, that doesn't mean rib. Okay, he took one from his side. One what? The thing you have in your side is a rib. Took one of his ribs. Bone. Bone of my bone. Flesh of my flesh. I think that probably scientifically it would explain it. And this is why he didn't say blood. I think he was asleep when it happened, but he clearly knew what happened. And would carry that. By the way, some people then say, well, men should have one less rib than women, but that's not true. Obviously, if there's a dad out there who got one of his fingers chopped off before he gave birth to, before his wife gave birth to to their son, the son isn't born with a finger cut off. He got all of his fingers. And this is the way it would take place. So I think Adam probably had a pretty good, strong knowledge of the things that really were happening there. Thank you. Okay, let's take a look at Manny down in San Antonio. Jesus was the testator for the New Testament, Hebrews 9:16. Who was the testator for the Old Testament? Thanks again for the question. Let's go to Hebrews 9, verse 16, see if we can put together some logic on who was the testator of the Old Testament. As it says in Hebrews 9:16, for where a testament is, let's kind of make an assumption here, there was a testament in the Old. There were previous testaments. This is a general statement. Where a testament is, there must also of necessity be the death of the testator. Now, it is speaking here of really, I think, a pretty specific kind of a covenant. And it would be the kind of covenant that we would use, even in modern language, when we would say, the last will and testament. And where that testament is, it requires the death. So, if Manny and I, we go down and we tell the attorney, hey, I'd like to make my will. I'd like to make my last will and testament. And we say, I'm going to give the geranium to my lovely wife, and I'm giving the mug to my son. And, we divvy out all of the stuff. Well, in order for them to receive, there has to be our death. That's what you got. So I think here the question is, are we taking testament in the broadest sense of covenant when Hebrews 9:16 is actually using an illustration talking in the narrow sense of a last will and testament? So we have the testament that is given to Abraham. Now, in Abraham's covenant, there was some death. You remember the animals that were split in two. Or what about the covenant with Noah? The covenant, testified by the rainbow. Nothing died to make a rainbow. The death of the testator. What is there? Maybe you could argue, well, yeah, Noah had already made a sacrifice that was given. In the Old Testament, the Testament of the Law, of course, we have the sacrifices that were given. So you could argue, I think it's a weak argument, but you could argue the Abrahamic covenant had some death. The Noahic rainbow covenant had a sacrifice that was involved with it. Moses' covenant had death that went away. But I think those are sealing the covenant. And as a matter of fact, in Noah, I would argue that it's just coincidental that Noah had given a sacrifice there. In Abraham, I would say the death sealed the covenant, but certainly didn't deliver the covenant. And in Moses' day, I would say the death was nothing but a symbol of being under the covenant. As a matter of fact, it was the circumcision that was the sign and the seal of the covenant. And so when you would look at that, you could argue that where there's a testament, there also must of necessity be the death of the testator, and say, well, wait a minute. There was no death involved in the Abrahamic covenant or required in the Abrahamic covenant. God didn't say to Abraham, I'm going to make you a great nation once you die, or I'm going to make a great nation once I die. There was no death involved. It wasn't that kind of a last will and testament. So I think what we've got here, and we would want to flesh this out more fully and make sure we get this right, but I think what we've got is that there, in the book of Hebrews, chapter 9, verse 16, this is giving an illustration of the last will and testament. And it is, I believe here, giving the illustration that Jesus, the Messiah, was supposed to die in order then to give the Jewish people their inheritance. And in that illustration, which doesn't have anything to do with the Old Covenant, because the Old Covenant, other than perhaps the Davidic covenant, but the other covenants, they don't require that death in order to bring it. It's not that kind of a testament, not that kind of a last will and testament. So I think what we've got is an illustration. Now, it would be a good thing to flesh that out, because I think you've got a legitimate question. Well, if a testament, of necessity has the death of a testator, then where's the one for the Abrahamic covenant, the Noahic covenant, the Moses covenant, the Davidic covenant? Where's the death that's given? How can we just have to have a death for the new covenant? And Jesus is the testator of the new covenant. I think that the new covenant we would question the assumption on here, but I think we would say the new covenant does require, the new covenant is a last will and testament that passes on an inheritance which the others do not have. and that therefore the new covenant is a very different kind of a covenant. So, for example, we have different kinds of covenants. The president of the United States would stand and put his hand on the Bible, I suppose, and he would say, am standing to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, so help me God. Well, that doesn't require a tithe. It's a covenant that he's made. A man and a woman would stand and make a covenant with God and one another as they stand out before them. And we're going to have in one of the Because You Asked sermons, by the way, the question on is marriage a covenant and what's the right dividing position on divorce and remarriage and marriage in general. We'll look at that in a number of weeks down the road. But these are covenants that we make that don't require the death of the testator. But then we make our last will and testament that does require the death of the testator. So I think our argument would have to be this new covenant is a very different covenant than the other covenants. And you come at it by asking, what really is kind of a, I don't know, can you call it in a sense, an obvious question, and yet it's one of those questions that nobody ever asks, and we should ask. My favorite Jamaican down there, Mark. Good to see you. I need to go on vacation to Jamaica, Mark. Just so I can meet my favorite Jamaican, and because I've never been to Jamaica before, but it just sounds so Jamaican. It sounds wonderful, Mark. Especially in the wintertime. It's February. You should not talk to us about Jamaica. Are you originally from Jamaica? I'd like to know this. Were you born and raised in Jamaica, or did you just decide to, get out of Cleveland or something? What's the story there? Can you tell me who are among your favorite living theologians? I don't know if I can. This is hard. I can tell you some of my favorite dead theologians, like Sir Robert Anderson, E.W. Bullinger. In a different light, John Nelson Darby, some of these guys that are sort of my go-to, F.W. Grant, are people I'll kind of go to and say, yeah, I'd like to know what they had to say about this. My favorite living theologians, I've got some that from time to time I might call them up and ask their opinion or talk to them. I have very little regard for seminary theologians. My experience with seminary theologians is they know it all, and so they know nothing. That is, they don't question the assumptions. If you want to ask them something about church history, probably okay. If you want to ask them something about, maybe even some biblical background kind of issue, you're probably okay. When was the book of Romans written? Something like that. You're probably okay. For the most part, you'd run into some problems there too. And among conservatives, the authorship of the scriptures and things like that, you'd probably be okay. But that's, I don't know if that's really theology. That's bibliology, maybe we could say, and it's history. In terms of theology, that is our doctrine. My problem with the seminary theologians is all they can do is regurgitate that which they heard somebody else say. And they have a very, very difficult time somebody giving them a different position and dealing with and working through those kind of issues. I think that, and it would be kind of a fun experiment someday, though we're not going to do it, But maybe sometime in my absence, if I brought some esteemed theologian in here to sit at the Ask the Theologian desk, and maybe they're the John Doe professor of really smart stuff at the big box seminary, they would not be able to answer the broad range of questions that come to this program, because they're very narrow focused, specialized. And you all would listen to it and say, oh my goodness, can't you think for yourself? That doesn't even go with this. It makes a conflict with it. You would be so frustrated that my guess is you would either only listen to it for entertainment purposes, or you'd turn it off before it was done. And I've had enough experience with these seminary theologians to know that you're not going to get anything good out of there. I'm sure there are some exceptions somewhere. I just don't know them. Pastor theologians, I wish there were more. That's hard to find. If you want to talk to a pastor about sociological principles for church growth, they can help you out. If you want to talk to a pastor about leadership principles, leadership principles learned from Moses, the guy who couldn't figure out how to separate them into 50. You could, okay, they can help you. If you want to find out golf, if you want to find out, trading Bitcoin, those kind of things. Okay, yeah, you can find out those kind of things. But pastors, my experience again is, and there certainly are exceptions. My experience is, they're pretty inept with the Bible. The Padre of Old San Antone knows more of the Bible than they do, or the rifleman in Kent. These guys know more. Bob in Austin, Minnesota, he knows more about the Bible than the average pastor out there that came from the big box seminary. It's shameful, but it's true. So you get to living theologians. The problem is, there's some really smart guys that, are smart in terms of having the knowledge of regurgitating what somebody else said. That's not all that smart. It's just you learn a lot of things and have them memorized. There aren't many guys that deal with theology. Now, I know that sounds a little bit arrogant, perhaps, but I would defend it scientifically. If you could defend it scientifically, if we could take if we could take a month and line up a bunch of theologians and put this real theological test with a theologian, I think you'd have a very hard time finding any. Now, there are some right dividing theologians that have some good stuff. I don't go to them often, but there are guys like Richard Jordan, like Justin Johnson, like Joel Fink, like Joel Hayes, and all of these kind of in a different realm, and they've got some pretty good stuff. So from time to time, I might be interested in what they have. Even Les Feldick, he's got some good things to say in terms of just exegetical Bible study. So there's some out there. I tend, and again, maybe I'm fooling myself. I tend not to look at much in terms of what's a commentary say, what's the other preacher say, what's the stated position, the mid-acts position or the dispensational position, whatever. I don't know. So Sunday I'll start the book of Philippians, as we have, of course, already stated at 9:45, and I don't have a single commentary that I will go to. If I run into some linguistic problem, I'll go to a linguist and I'll find out something there. I'll look at probably some cross-reference resources and try to cross-reference some things. But honestly, by the time I have thoroughly studied the words, the word, and the context. I've filled up the 45 minutes I've got to teach, and I don't have time to go. I would be years and years and years getting through Philippians if I were to go check, see what John MacArthur has to say, or what, all the commentaries, the living theologian commentaries out there to see what it is they have to say on it. Now, the other thing I'll say, and John MacArthur is an exception on this. The other thing I'll have to say about this is that it's hard to find living theologians. Andy Woods was mentioned. It's hard to even take an Andy Woods. Typically, his stuff is not verse by verse. He's got some out there, but my teaching is verse by verse. Well, again, John MacArthur does that. J. Vernon McGee did that. He's dead. Where you take the guys, I don't know, an R.C. Sproul or something like that. They're not putting out commentaries and going through this. Here's verse by verse exegesis of the scripture. It's so hard to find that you got to go to dead commentaries, dead theologians in order to bring it. Okay, that was a long time answering that question there, but thanks, Mark from Jamaica. And I'll look you up when I get to Jamaica. I brought up, there's Chuck Missler. He's not alive anymore, of course. But Randy mentions, and we were on, I think it was Randy's question, wasn't it? Or I think it was, but anyway, on the idea of time. And Chuck Missler did have some interesting stuff on that. So you got guys like that, or like Andy Woods that was mentioned. Scott mentions, his Rapture series is excellent, and I agree on prophecy issues and on some of these things. Just really very solid and very good stuff. So topically, you can go to a number of different theologians and see, okay, what's the issue there? What's it about? But honestly, sometimes I will go outside of my own realm. I go often, if it's an Old Testament issue, I'll go to Jewish commentators, and some of them are alive. You wouldn't know any of the names if I brought them to you, but I would go to some Orthodox Jewish commentators to see what's the Jewish perspective. I may not agree with it, and I'll even go to some Catholic theologians from time to time. So I want to know, what do the Catholics say about this? Because it helps me to think, okay, how did they get to that position? How do you ever get there? And I try to trace that back, and then I say, okay, this connect to that. There's where I think they went wrong, and it helps me develop my own theology through that. I wish there were more pastor theologians, and that's kind of what I would consider myself, a pastor theologian. And I wish that there were more pastors who really were they would become theologians if they were just teaching the Bible verse by verse. It takes a while, but you get there. And let's go down to Dr. Tom, who's got an M&M question, a ministry question. Could you please explain how you conduct the Lord's table or communion in your church? And I agree with you that the Lord's table is not the Passover, but rather a meal together. Thank you. Yeah, I will explain that. I think that coming together to the Lord's table, we could call it the Lord's Supper. That's probably the term I use more often than any. Call it the Lord's table, the Lord's Supper. I don't really like to call it communion, because communion, I think, has a theology to it that I disagree with in the way that it's used, and that is that we come to the communion table because we're going to commune with God, either through his spiritual presence or his physical presence. The Catholics would say his physical presence, the Reformed would say his spiritual presence, and the radical Reformed would say it's bread and it's wine. In my case, grape juice. Now, so I would call it the Lord's Supper or the Lord's table. I would be comfortable with either one of those. I think that evangelicals, and I did not write about this in the book, but I think that evangelicals have made the Lord's table too cheap. They have made it either just something you sort of tack on and you do, or they have so removed the sacred element from their worship experience that they don't even know how to do this. I mean, when you are accustomed to every time you stand before your people, you got skinny jeans and a t-shirt, and you start out with a sports illustration, they're clueless. How do you do something sacred? And I really think that we are remembering the body and the blood of our Lord Jesus Christ. I think we ought to remind people, hey, what this is about is to remember that Jesus became flesh and blood. We're going to take a piece of bread, and it's going to remind us that Jesus became the stuff of the earth. He became flesh and blood. And then we're going to take a cup of juice, and it's going to remind us that Jesus, flesh and blood Jesus, shed his blood on our behalf. So I want to tell them just briefly what it is. Sometimes I'll take this whole service. Sometimes I'll just take the music portion of the service and do it in there, or the preaching portion of the service. And so I'll explain a little bit. I think that, again, as I already said, but that bread represents his body. This is my body. The cup represents his blood. This is my blood. And we want to remember, when we come to the Lord's table, we want to remember, 1, his body, 2, his blood. Now, that's something that I think ought to be done in a sacred manner, in a holy manner. I would say, and I used to, here in Taos, perhaps it's been a little different. I don't know that I've ever verbalized it, but always in the past anyway, it was the only time I would require our deacons who helped us serve it. It was the only time I would require them to wear a suit. I would say this is a different kind of thing. I don't care if you wear a suit any of the rest of the time, but you are going to be serving these elements that do have such a sacred reminder. Just like if you were dressed for, as a pallbearer, you'd spiff it up a little bit. And so I'd tell our deacons, if you don't have a suit, I got a bunch of them. Hopefully one of them fits you. But they would have their Lord's Supper suit, and some of them probably buried in that because it's the only one they had. And I'd say, put on a suit, put on a tie. Let's look good for this. I tend to do that when I preach anyway. You notice if you watch our services, a lot of times when we're singing, I have the jacket off. But by the time preaching comes, except in the summer here in Taos where we have no air conditioning, I'm gonna put a suit on. And so I'll stand before the Lord's table with a suit on. You'll never see me doing it in a casual manner. And just to explain, and then to call someone forward to help pass it out. I've had it where people came to the front. I'm not big on the actual ceremony of how it happens. I just think it ought to be dignified. And then, normally for us, I would hand it to some deacons with a little bit of ceremony to it, trying to, again, make it look dignified. I think that remembering the death of Jesus Christ ought to say, let's don't make light of this. And so we take it. I typically explain in the bread because we use leavened bread, which is unusual. And we do it because I don't think it's a Passover. So we use leavened bread. And I usually say, Jesus said he was the bread of life. And this bread is, it's the things of the earth. Just, man was made of the earth. Jesus is the thing. It's wheat, it's flour. But I say, this is yeast. That makes bread good. This is a little sugar in here. This has, you can tell this one's been in the oven. We usually use, we've got a lady in the church that makes it, but when she's gone and she's not going to make it, we go out and get pita bread. Peter's got yeast in it. I kind of like the burn marks on there because I can usually say, our Lord, think of what he went through. And, by his stripes we are healed. And the lady who makes ours will typically put some, with one of those little roller things that makes little perforations. She'll put those in there. That gives me the ability to talk about that just a little bit. And then we'll pass it out and I'll have everyone take it at the same time. And I usually say that because we practice an open communion, as it's called. So anybody there, I'll explain, that this is for those who are believers in Jesus Christ. They will, sometimes people don't know, we wait and take it together. And then they sort of feel embarrassed. So I just kind of explain that. And then we do the same with the cup. And then we come, and I usually have a little word about, we have looked back to the cross today, and Jesus said, as often as you drink this bread and you eat this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death till he come. Wonderful words, till he come. Now, say, if there's a communion here, it's that we have communed with believers down through the ages who've done this. Sometimes I'll say, everything, absolutely everything about the church has changed, except believers down through the ages still come together and they take a little piece of bread and a little cup of the fruit of the vine, and they remember the body and the blood of the Lord Jesus Christ. So if there's any communing, it's with believers past, present, and future till he comes. And aren't those good words? Till he come. Thanks for your word there. And a little lightning round question that also comes from Dr. Tom. Could you please explain Proverbs 8:35? Let's see if I can. The answer is maybe. Because one of these days I'm getting to Proverbs so that I'll be able to take Proverbs questions and not be scared of them. Right now I'm scared of them. Let's see what it says. For whoso findeth me findeth life, and shall obtain favor of the Lord. Okay, who is me is the first thing I want to know. Whoso findeth me findeth life, and shall obtain favor of the Lord. If we were just evangelicals, we would probably take that to say, everybody who comes to Jesus and finds Jesus has everlasting life. Is that what it means? Can we find the identity of the me? So we're going to follow, blessed is the man that heareth me in the previous verse. Verse 34, now therefore hearken unto me, for blessed are they that keep my ways. Verse 31, my delights. See again, if we, where do we find when he prepared the heavens, I was there. He set a compass on the face of the deep. When he established the clouds, he strengthened. When he gave, that his waters he appointed, then I was by him as one brought up with him. Now, who is this I that was there when he prepared the heavens? Is this Jesus, the Son of God? And yet we know from Colossians that Jesus was the one who all things were created through him. So immediately we began to say, I don't know if that's talking about, Jesus. So let's see. Before the hills was I brought forth. So we could follow this. I was set up from everlasting, and follow these eyes. My fruit is better than gold. The eyes and the me's, follow them all the way up. I love those that love me. Let's see. I am understanding. Okay. Are we talking about understanding here, or wisdom, or are we talking about Jesus Christ, the second person of the Trinity? I, wisdom, dwell with prudence. Okay, I, wisdom. I am understanding. Wisdom is better than rubies. So it looks like, we'll stop at verse 12. We should go back further to study it fully, but it looks like the wisdom begins to talk in verse 12, the personification of wisdom. For wisdom, counsel is mine. I am understanding. By wisdom, kings reign. Now, if we take that and we go all the way back down to verse 35, then whoso findeth wisdom findeth life and shall obtain favor of the Lord. But he that sinneth against wisdom wrongeth his own soul, and they that hate wisdom love death. Even in chapter 9, wisdom hath builded her house. She hath hewn her, out of her 7 pearls. I think in its strictest form, we have to say, if you want to find life, find wisdom. Wisdom will lead to life, right? If you want to find the favor of the Lord, find wisdom. What's the opposite of wisdom? Foolishness. Foolishness is not going to find life. Foolishness is not going to find the favor of the Lord. So I think here, in its strictest form, what we better stick with is not to make this some evangelistic sense of Jesus Christ talking, but rather to make it the general truth of wisdom. Now, the one reason I would be afraid to make this, for example, Jesus and everybody who finds Jesus finds life, is that in the context of Proverbs chapter 8, we might find something then that would end up contradicting Jesus. I mean, we already found the little thing here. I was there when he made the earth. Well, wait a minute. Yeah, I thought you made the earth. So you get into some contradictions. But what if you get into one that really is fundamental and breaks down the foundations of the gospel? It's because you started with the wrong assumption and didn't carry that through. So I would stick with wisdom on here. And if I were giving a sermon without carrying through my assumption that I want to carry through that I haven't even talked about yet, I would just give a sermon on wisdom. Hey, boys and girls, we need to be wise, not foolish. Foolish people end up in the grave. Wise people find life and they obtain favor of the Lord, because the Lord is a lover of wisdom and the inventor of wisdom. Now, I do think that there is likely, and I have not discovered it yet, this is my hunch. I think that Proverbs has a prophetic view, which means a typological, which means wisdom may be the type, the personification of wisdom is the type of something that is yet to come. Could we argue it is the type of Jesus, the Messiah? If so, we would be able to go all through the book and say, anywhere you come in the book of Proverbs, you can take wisdom and substitute Messiah. And it would always work. Now, could we do that? I don't know. I mean, we find one problem in here that would deal with it. And we may find that wisdom is not even the type of the Messiah. Maybe it's the type of righteous Israel or something like this. And so I think there's more to it, but if you forced me to preach this Sunday in Proverbs chapter 8, verse 35, I would stick with wisdom and the need for wisdom. If you give me a little while longer, I may come up with something better. How's that, Dr. Tom? Thanks for the question there. Scott, down in the Hill Country, Texas, what can you tell us regarding whether or not John Nelson Darby was influenced or not by Edward Irving? There's a lot of speculation about who influenced Darby. And there's a number of speculations, the Reverend Edward Irving being one of them, a Scottish clergyman generally regarded as the main figure behind the foundation of the Catholic Apostolic Church, and he speaks of some of this. Now, don't let that all totally throw you off, apostolic and Catholic. And Anglican, everything, it all meant something a little bit different than it does today. So he was this guy that started a movement. Um, and I think that I think that when you read Darby, he was a prolific writer. About the only thing I read consistently of Darby, let's look in my library here. Yeah, the only one, I use the Darby Bible sometimes, his English translation, and I use the synopsis of the Bible, Darby's synopsis. He's got it in a number of volumes, and it's just a chapter by chapter synopsis. Doesn't go into a lot of detail, so it's not fantastic, because I want to know about that verse, and he just gives a synopsis, which is probably why he called it a synopsis. But nonetheless, it was, for example, last night I talked about grace, mercy, and peace, as opposed to just grace and peace. It was Darby that pointed out, and I appreciated him. I sent him a thank you note. He pointed out that grace, mercy, and peace he used for individuals. Grace and peace he used for churches. Again, maybe coincidental, but Darby noticed the coincidence. Now, overall, here's what I think. I think that Darby wrote too much that was sound, that was solid, to say he got his stuff from Edward Irving or whatever person you want to fill in, because he did too much. He might have been influenced in some areas of thinking by a guy named Edward Irving. They're, roughly the same time period, Irving being a little bit earlier. They would have, maybe to some degree run in the same theological circles. They both had the idea of, separating just a little bit. And so probably they would have loved to have, sat and had coffee together and agreed with one another and disagreed on some things. But would you call that, influenced? I don't know. It would be like this. It would be like, I heard that Randy White got the grace, mercy, and peace thing from Darby. Randy White is influenced by Darby. And his session number 1 on the first 9 verses of the book of Philemon, it's all Darby. Well, if you read what Darby said on it and you read what Randy White said, there's one little line I got from Darby. And, I said I got it from Darby, but that's it. So, yeah, it influenced my study on the book of Philemon. But bottom line is, I think Darby wrote too much stuff to narrow it down to say, this is his influence. I think he was influenced by what he had for lunch. I think he was influenced by his education. I think he was influenced by Anglicanism. I think he was influenced by, he could have written a book called Anglical Garbage. Not sure how you would say that. And all of that was part of the influence. But he was just brilliant, a tremendous linguist. And I love linguists. He was a tremendous linguist. And so he was just well too studied, I think, to narrow it down into one individual. And, for a Friday, sometimes on Fridays, we are slow on questions. But I've got Russell, and I've got Edith, and I've got Paul, and I've got Rich, and I've got, Chuck. I'll go ahead and take Chuck's question. Don't geraniums put off a stinky smell?. Not this one. Not this one. Not this one. Maybe if you had a big old geranium, though, it might. Yeah, you're right. Usually geraniums go outside. Uh, but I've seen them inside. I've never had much luck with them inside, except for this one. You know, it's been sitting out there in the window, and I think the secret is that it's close enough. It really all it does is listen to Ask the Theologian, and they say you're supposed to. So try this. If you've got plants that aren't doing well, uh, put up Ask the Theologian podcast. We're getting close, so put the podcast there to see if it helps your geraniums. Okay, so I got Chuck's question taken care of, although he's got a logistics question there as well. So I'm so sorry that I've got to put off some of those questions, but I am going to put them off because I also have an 11 o'clock appointment, and it's 11:03, and I hear voices out there saying, time to quit, theologian. So I gotta go. But Sunday, I look forward to the book of Philippians, 9:45. We'll get that started. And then again, should you confess, should there be the public confession of sins? There, I got a graphic for you there, so you can take that. That's 10:45, the truth about public confession of sin. And we'll take that and be ready to go for it. And I look forward to seeing you either live or archived. And then back next week. No Wednesday next week, but